But you see, I have the other slipper.
When people are asked who their favorite Disney princess is, Cinderella usually isn't the first name that comes up. Sure, there are some people who might have her ranked higher than others, but let's be real. When it comes to fan favorite, she's often overshadowed by princesses like Ariel, Mulan, or even the newer ones like Rapunzel and Tiana. But for me, it's a different story. When I think about my favorite Disney princesses, Cinderella is always near the top of my list. Now, part of that might be nostalgia. Growing up, Cinderella was the only Disney Princess DVD that I had, so it was constantly playing in my house. And when The Princess and the Frog came out in 2009, I was already 8 years old. By that time, Cinderella had already secured her spot in my heart. But it's more than just childhood memories. Even now, whenever I rewatch Cinderella, it gives me this warm, comforting feeling. There's just something about it that makes me feel happy every time. And yeah, I feel like Cinderella doesn't get the love she deserves. A lot of people see her as boring, weak, or just not as interesting as the other princesses. But I completely disagree with that. I think every Disney princess has their own strengths, and Cinderella is no exception. So in this video, I want to break down why I think Cinderella is one of the best Disney princesses, at least in my opinion. And if you're someone who overlooked her, maybe after this video, you'll see her in a new light. And also, I'm not saying she's the best Disney princess of all time. Honestly, at least for me, it's way too hard to pick just one. But she's definitely up there for me, and by the end of this video, maybe she'll be a little higher on your list as well. When watching the first Cinderella, we learned that her father was a widow raising her alone. He provided for her in every way he could, ensuring that she had a comfortable life filled with material things. But despite all that he gave her, he believed that what she truly needed was a mother. That belief led him to marry Lady Tremaine. Now, some might argue that he should have been more cautious before bringing her into their lives, perhaps taking more time to truly understand her character and whether she had good intentions. But even if he had done that, it's entirely possible that Lady Tremaine was simply hiding her true nature. People can be deceptive, especially when they have something to gain. She might have carefully presented herself as the perfect wife and mother, convincing him that she would love and care for Cinderella as her own. I do believe that in his heart, Cinderella's father thought that he was doing the right thing. I think he would have been devastated to see how Lady Tremaine truly treated Cinderella once he was gone. As for Lady Tremaine, I think her hatred for Cinderella stemmed from jealousy. She envied the love that Cinderella's father had for her, a love that she and her daughters never received. Cinderella had a beautiful life while her father was alive, and I believe Lady Tremaine wanted that life for herself and her own children. With that in mind, I don't think she married Cinderella's father out of love. I think she saw an opportunity for status and security, and she took it. It was even mentioned in the first movie that Lady Tremaine was jealous of Cinderella's beauty, often comparing her to her own children. That jealousy was likely a driving force behind why she treated Cinderella so cruelly. Instead of encouraging Drizella and Anastasia to do better, she trained them to bring Cinderella down. She projected her own insecurities onto them, and in turn, they took it out on Cinderella. Despite all of this, Lady Tremaine is often overlooked as a Disney villain. She doesn't have magic or supernatural abilities like most other Disney villains, at least not in the first movie. And I think that's why people tend to dismiss how terrifying she really is. But her power lies in something far more sinister: manipulation. She doesn't need spells or curses to control people. She does it through psychological abuse. She tries to mentally break Cinderella down, stripping away her confidence, her hope, and any sense of self-worth she has. And that type of evil is very real. It exists in a real world. That's what makes Lady Tremaine a standout villain to me. She reflects the kind of emotional and psychological abuse that actual people go through. Another Disney villain who operates in a similar way is Mother Gothel from Tangled. She doesn't have magical abilities beyond using Rapunzel's hair, but she's a master manipulator. She isolates Rapunzel and convinces her that the outside world is too dangerous, making her feel helpless and dependent. Lady Tremaine does the same thing to Cinderella. She traps her in a life of abuse and isolation, ensuring that she has no means of escape or self-sufficiency. That level of control is terrifying because it's so real. After Cinderella's father passed away, Lady Tremaine and her daughter spent years emotionally and verbally abusing her. They stripped her of her identity, forcing her into a role of a servant. And yet, through it all, Cinderella remained kind. The one time she had a chance to do something for herself was when the king invited every eligible woman in the kingdom to the royal ball. For Cinderella, this was a rare opportunity, a moment where, just for a night, she could experience life outside of her stepmother's control. And Lady Tremaine, being the manipulative person she is, saw just how much Cinderella wanted to go. She dangled that hope in front of her, making her believe it was possible, only to rip it away at the last moment in the most humiliating way possible. Lady Tremaine told Cinderella she can go to the ball if she finished all of her chores. But let's not forget, earlier that day, Lady Tremaine had already doubled her workload. making it nearly impossible to complete everything in time. Then, as Cinderella worked tirelessly, she added even more tasks on top of that. Even so, Cinderella pushed through. She remained hopeful, believing that if she finished, she would finally get to experience something joyful for once. And Lady Tremaine let her hold on to that hope. She watched as Cinderella got dressed, allowed her to feel excitement, and let her believe that for the first time in years, she was going to be treated like an equal. Then, in an instant, she destroyed her. And she didn't even have to lay a finger on Cinderella herself. She just gave a subtle nod to Drizella and Anastasia, and they tore Cinderella's dress apart, shredding what was likely one of the last things she had to remember her mother by. And they didn't just ruin the dress, they shattered Cinderella's spirit. This scene was heartbreaking to watch because for the first time, we see Cinderella truly break. Up until that moment, she endured everything with a quiet resilience. But this was the moment that pushed her past her limit. A lot of people wonder why Cinderella didn't just fight back, but not everyone who is abused responds with physical resistance. That doesn't make them weak. Cinderella isn't a fighter in a traditional sense, but that doesn't mean she isn't strong. Her strength lies in her kindness, her resilience, and her ability to remain hopeful despite everything she's been through. That's the kind of strength that often goes unrecognized. And yes, she had moments of sadness. She cried and she broke down, but honestly, who wouldn't? What makes her even more remarkable is that after it all, she never became bitter. She never lost sight of who she was. And that's what makes the moment that she gets to go to the ball even more rewarding. People love to say that Cinderella needed a man to save her, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. At no point did she complain to Prince Charming about her life. She didn't pour out her trauma or beg for him to take her away. She didn't even tell him her name. She wasn't one of the women lining up desperate to be noticed by the prince. She wasn't looking for a savior. She just wanted one night of freedom. One night when she can experience happiness on her own terms. And that's exactly what she got. She didn't go to the ball searching for love, and neither did the prince. In fact, it was the king that was frustrated that the prince hadn't found love and orchestrated the ball as a way to push him towards marriage. The entire event was set up to force the prince into choosing a wife. But when he met Cinderella, it wasn't about obligation. It was about a genuine connection. They met by chance and they fell in love naturally. And while Cinderella wasn't physically abused, she endured years of emotional and psychological torment. That kind of abuse isn't always visible, but it's just as damaging. I don't understand how people can criticize Cinderella for staying in that house. It's the same logic of asking an abuse victim, why didn't you just leave? It's an unfair question. That was her home. She grew up there and that was the only life she had ever known. And even if she wanted to leave, where was she supposed to go? With what money and with what resources? She had no support system, no friends to turn to, and no way to survive on her own. People fail to realize this bigger picture. After everything she endured, Cinderella still remained kind, compassionate, and hopeful. She didn't let her trauma define her, and she never let her stepmother's cruelty turn her into someone she wasn't. So for people to say that she's weak is so crazy to me. Her strength wasn't in fighting back, it was in her perseverance. And that's what makes her such an incredible character. Many people who experience abuse end up perpetuating that cycle, but Cinderella did not. She refused to become like them. And that, more than anything, is what makes her so powerful. In Cinderella 2, we get to see how Cinderella adjusts to life in the castle and embraces her new role as princess. What's so special about this sequel is that it doesn't just show a happily ever after moment and leave it at that. It actually explores Cinderella's character, proving once again how kind, humble, and strong she truly is. On her very first morning as princess, Cinderella could have easily leaned into her luxurious lifestyle since she had so much access to it. But instead, she remained the same down-to-earth person that she's always been. When Prudence, the head of the castle staff, comes to wake her, she's shocked to find that Cinderella is already awake, and not just awake, but in the kitchen preparing breakfast for herself. This is something that she absolutely did not have to do. She had an entire team of cooks at her disposal, yet she chose to make her own meal, showing that her title as princess didn't change who she was at her core. Not only that, but she's also wearing the same worn-out dress from when she was treated as a servant in the first movie. This is a small detail, but a powerful moment. Cinderella now has an entire wardrobe filled with extravagant gowns fit for a princess, yet she chooses to wear a humble, simple dress that she's had for years. She could have easily shed her old identity and fully embraced her new royal status, but instead she chose to stay true to herself. Even when the castle staff insist on dressing her in extravagant attire, she remains grounded, proving that her worth isn't tied to the wealth or status. She doesn't see herself as above anyone else, and that mindset becomes the foundation for the changes she brings to the castle. Later in the movie, Cinderella continues to challenge the outdated rules of the palace. She's eager to meet the citizens of the kingdom and welcomes the opportunity to speak with them. At one point, she even invites them into the castle for a banquet. However, Prudence quickly stops her, reminding her that commoners are not allowed inside. But Cinderella, being who she is, doesn't accept that. She values people for who they are, not for their status, and she makes it clear that everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. By inviting both the kingdom's citizens and the royals to the same event, she sends a powerful message. No one is more important than anyone else. It's so inspiring to see that after all of the suffering she endured in the previous movie, Cinderella doesn't let that harden her heart. Many people who go through trauma develop a cold or grounded personality as a means of self-protection. but Cinderella does the opposite. Instead of shutting people out, she embraces them with open arms. One of the most impactful moments in the movie is when Cinderella crosses paths with her stepsister, Anastasia. While walking through the village, Cinderella notices that Anastasia had developed a crush on a kind-hearted baker, but is too shy and insecure to approach him. Cinderella, despite everything Anastasia has put her through, decides to help her. She subtly encourages a moment of connection between Anastasia and the baker, hoping to give her confidence to pursue him. However, Anastasia, in typical fashion, ends up tripping and falling face first into a pile of pastries, completely humiliating herself in front of the entire bakery. Villagers point and laugh at her, and she runs away in embarrassment. Now this is where Cinderella's true nature shines. She has every reason to ignore Anastasia's humiliation. After all, this is the same stepsister who mocked her, tore apart her dress, and treated her like a servant for years. But Cinderella doesn't think that way. She immediately follows Anastasia to comfort her, making sure she doesn't have to go through the pain of embarrassment alone. Even when Anastasia greets Cinderella with an insult, calling her a laundry maid, Cinderella doesn't let it get to her. She remains kind, joyful, and supportive. Instead of holding on to the past, Cinderella extends a hand of kindness, offering Anastasia a fresh start. She invites her to the castle, gets her cleaned up in a new dress, and even gives her advice on how to be kind. She reassures Anastasia that she is worthy of love and that dreams do really come true. This is such a powerful moment because it highlights one of Cinderella's greatest strengths, her ability to forgive and show compassion even to those who don't deserve it. It would have been so easy for Cinderella to take a different path. She could have been vengeful. She could have looked down on Anastasia and reminded her of all the terrible things she did. But instead she chose kindness. She chose to help Anastasia believe in herself and open her heart to love. That's what makes Cinderella so remarkable. Not just her resilience, but her unwavering goodness despite everything she's been through. Her strength isn't about fighting back or getting revenge. It's about maintaining her kind spirit no matter what life throws at her. And that's what makes Cinderella such an inspiring character. In my opinion, Cinderella 3 is the best representation of Cinderella's strength, resilience, and kindness. One of the most admirable things about Cinderella is that she doesn't hold grudges. In Cinderella 3, she chose to help her stepsister Anastasia, not because she has to, but because she wants to. Despite everything Anastasia did to her in the past, Cinderella sees the good in her and recognizes that she too has been manipulated by Lady Tremaine. Instead of letting their history divide them, Cinderella understands Anastasia's pain and offers her a chance to change. This compassion ultimately comes full circle when Anastasia, in turn, chooses to go against her mother's wishes and help Cinderella. This is a powerful moment because it highlights an often overlooked reality. Cinderella wasn't the only one who suffered under Lady Tremaine's abuse. While Cinderella undoubtedly endured the worst of the abuse, Cinderella 3 gives us a closer look at how both Anastasia and Drizella were also mistreated by their mother. They weren't just spoiled or mean for the sake of being mean. They were raised in an environment where love and kindness was conditional, and their worth was tied to their ability to please their mother. Cinderella's choice to help Anastasia, despite everything, isn't just an act of kindness, it's an act of understanding. She knows firsthand what it's like to live under Lady Tremaine's control. And rather than seeking revenge or turning her back, she extends grace to someone who is also trapped in that cycle. Lady Tremaine's biggest mistake was believing that Cinderella's happily ever after was solely a result of the fairy godmother's magic. She saw the enchanted dress, the carriage, and the transformed pumpkin and assumed that without magic, Cinderella would have never found happiness. But what she failed to recognize was that magic wasn't what made Cinderella special. It was her faith and determination. Cinderella's journey in the first movie was filled with obstacles. Her dress was torn apart, she was locked in the attic, and her stepmother even shattered the glass slipper right before she had a chance to prove it was hers. In every single one of those moments, Cinderella could have given up. She could have just accepted that life was unfair and that her happiness was simply out of reach, but she didn't. She kept pushing forward. When her dress was destroyed, she still wanted to go to the ball. When she was locked away, she never stopped fighting to get out. And when the glass slipper was broken, she didn't despair. She pulled out a second one, proving that her fate was never tied to luck or magic alone. It was her unwavering faith that things could get better, and the fact that she actually took steps toward a better future. But Lady Tremaine was blind to all of this. When she discovered the fairy godmother's magic, she became obsessed with using it to rewrite Cinderella's story, believing that if she had the same magic, she could force a different ending. She uses the wand to turn back time, making it so that the glass slipper fits Anastasia instead of Cinderella. When Cinderella realizes that something is wrong because she knows she was the one that danced with the prince, Lady Tremaine tells her to stay away and that the prince will be marrying Anastasia instead. At this moment, Cinderella could have accepted defeat, but instead, she refuses to let her story be rewritten without a fight. She sneaks into the palace, determined to speak to the prince herself. When she discovers that he's under a spell, she doesn't just stand by. She takes action, doing everything in her power to retrieve the wand and undo the enchantment. But before she can do this, Lady Tremaine has her caught and banished from the kingdom, sending her away on a ship. Even then, Cinderella still does not give up. She fights her way back, risking everything to set things right. She only stops trying when she physically cannot fight anymore. That's what makes her such an incredible character. She never backs down, no matter how impossible things seem. One of the most defining moments in Cinderella 3 happens near the end when she finally comes face to face with Anastasia, who has now been transformed into an exact copy of her using magic. At this point, Cinderella doesn't yell or demand justice. Instead, she looks at Anastasia with compassion and asks her a simple, profound question. She asks her if this is truly what she wants. This scene is so important because it shows Cinderella's heart. She isn't just fighting to get her own happy ending. She genuinely cares about Anastasia's happiness too. She doesn't see her stepsister as a villain, but as someone who has been manipulated and pressured into a situation that she may not even want. And for a brief moment, it seems like Cinderella's words are reaching her. But before Anastasia can answer her question, Lady Tremaine intervenes, using magic to send Cinderella away once again. At this point, Lady Tremaine even transforms Lucifer into a human in an attempt to eliminate Cinderella for good. But Cinderella doesn't just sit back and accept her fate, she fights back. She outsmarts and defeats Lucifer, escapes, and once again makes her way back to the palace. By the time she reaches the wedding, her gown is destroyed, her hair is a mess, and she looks nothing like the perfect polished princess that she's supposed to be. But none of that matters to her. She's not there to impress anyone. She's there to stand up for herself and fight for what's right. She refuses to let her story be rewritten by someone else's selfish desires. And the most beautiful part is that even after everything her stepmother and stepsisters put her through, Cinderella still handles the situation with so much love and grace. She never once expresses anger towards Anastasia. Instead, she thanks her for choosing to do the right thing in the end. Cinderella's strength isn't just in how she fights, it's in how she forgives. That's what makes her such an inspiring character. Even in a world when she has every reason to be bitter, every reason to seek revenge, and every reason to give up, she never does. She chooses kindness, she chooses love, and she chooses to believe in the good in others even when they don't deserve it. Cinderella's story is one of faith, resilience, and unwavering hope. Despite everything she endured, she remained humble, kind, and full of grace. Not because life was easy for her, but because she held on to an unbreakable faith that things would one day get better. Her faith was so powerful that even in her darkest moment, when she felt completely broken, it manifested into something miraculous. When her stepsisters tore apart her dress and ruined her last chance of attending the ball, she finally broke down. She stayed strong for so long, but in that moment, it felt like she reached her limit. She had done everything right, remained kind despite the cruelty she faced, and yet it seemed like happiness was always just out of reach. But instead of this moment marking her end, it became the turning point in her story. Just when she thought there was no more hope left, her fairy godmother appeared. This moment is so much more than just magic. It's literally a representation of Cinderella's faith materializing. She spent years believing that someday, somehow, things would change. And because of that belief, because of that faith, when she hit rock bottom, she was rewarded. The fairy godmother herself refers to what happens as a miracle, and that's exactly what it is. Cinderella's story is a testimony to the idea that holding on to faith, even when it seems impossible, can open doors you never imagined. What's even more beautiful is that Cinderella never takes any of it for granted. When the fairy godmother tells her that the spell is only temporary, that everything will return to normal by midnight, Cinderella doesn't complain or feel cheated. She doesn't demand more or question why her happiness has an expiration date. Instead, she's just grateful. She tells the fairy godmother that even though the magic will fade, what she's been given is still far more than what she could have ever hoped for. That's humility. That's the ability to appreciate even temporary joy. And that speaks volumes about her character. Many people misunderstand Cinderella's strength. Some see her as weak or passive because she doesn't fight back physically, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Her strength isn't just about physical power, it's about her endurance. It's about holding on to yourself, your values, and your hope even when the world tries to strip them away from you. Cinderella lived under constant emotional and psychological abuse for years, yet she never became bitter. She never let the abuse change her into something that she wasn't. And that's real strength. The fact that she continued to believe in kindness and goodness and a future beyond the walls of her home, when she had every reason to give up, proves just how powerful she truly is. Many people in her situation would have cracked under pressure, losing themselves to anger or despair. But Cinderella never did. She refused to let her circumstances define her. She chose to hold on to hope in a world that constantly told her to give up. That's far from weakness. That's resilience in its purest form. People often blame Cinderella for not doing more to escape her situation, as if she had control over the abuse she suffered. She was a victim of her circumstances, trapped in an environment where she had little agency. The idea that she should have just simply fought back ignores the reality of how abuse works. What makes her story so inspiring isn't that she physically overpowered her abusers, it's that she outlasted them. She endured, she survived, and she never lost sight of who she was. Her happy ending, escaping her toxic environment, marrying the prince, and finally stepping into the life that she deserved, isn't just a fairy tale, it's a message. It's a reminder that no matter how dark things seem, No matter how many times life knocks you down, if you keep holding on to hope, things will get better. Cinderella's story is a testament to the power of faith, the importance of resilience, and the beauty of never losing sight of your own light, even in the darkest times.
I don't care if we're on a ride, as long as I'm next to you. And if loving you was a crime, then why bring out the best in you? I hear the sounds when we make love.
Cinderella's story is a powerful testament to the strength of faith. She shows us what can happen when you hold on to hope, even when life feels impossible, and even when it seems like there's no way out. She reminds us that kindness is not a weakness, but a strength. That choosing to be good even when others are cruel can have a profound impact, not just on your own lives, but on those around us. She teaches us that patience and hope are not in vain. That good things come to those who refuse to let hardships define them. That even in the face of struggle, holding on to who you are and what you believe in matters. And most importantly, she shows us the power of humility. Even when her circumstances changed for the better, she never lost sight of who she was. She remained true to herself, proving that success and status doesn't define a person, but character does. Cinderella is not weak. She is so strong in so many ways, and that's why she continues to inspire me. I would like to know your thoughts on this video and also on Cinderella. Comment your thoughts down below and subscribe for more content like this.